The Stranger by Albert Camus is a classic of existentialist literature, featuring a disconnected main character who faces consequences for a violent action he committed, even though he evidently has no concept of consequences, violence, or even feelings. If you're my age and you grew up in the States, chances are you read this in your high school English class. And all I can tell you is, it's a really different book to read now. Hello and welcome to The Best Book Ever, the podcast where we get to know interesting people by asking them about their favorite book. I'm your host, Julie Strauss, and joining me today is Suswati Basu, an award-winning activist and journalist, and the host of the How to Be podcast, which looks at mental well-being through reading nonfiction and interviewing authors. Believe it or not, and I still kind of can't believe it, Suswati read The Stranger at the age of 11, and we had a lot of fun talking about why it's relevant now and how it has changed with the times. Hi, Suswati. Welcome to the Best Book Ever podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Judy. I'm really excited to be here.
I am too. This is a book I did not anticipate coming. But before we get to the book we're going to discuss today, will you tell my listeners how many languages you speak?
Oh, God. It's about 5 now.
About 5.
Yeah. So basically, I speak like multiple languages, but I started taking a 6th as well. So I'm in the process of just kind of, I can read bits of it, but I'm still not like nowhere near fluent or anything. So basically I studied Mandarin at university. So that was my degree. So I lived out in China for 4 years, which is why I speak Chinese. Then I speak Spanish, which I spent quite a few summers in Spain, living with families in Spain. So I speak Spanish. And then I speak multiple Indian languages because that's kind of the standard. Yeah, India is such a vast country that, you know, you have to have your kind of your mother tongue and then the national language. So Bengali is my mother tongue from Northeast India. And then Hindi is the national language of North India. So you can kind of figure out the other languages. So a bit of Punjabi and Urdu from the north as well. But the new language I was starting to learn was Arabic. So I was starting to read the Arabic script. So yes, it's a work in progress, trying to be like master the world of languages, but it's great.
What do you read in? And do you have preferences?
Oh, I'm not going to lie. Like English is my, preference for sure. Just because there's certain nuances, obviously, to language, isn't it? Where, you won't necessarily understand certain things. Like comedy is a really good example in different languages because it just doesn't translate. Someone's humor from France, I can attest to this. I just don't get. I'm just like, that is slapstick. I just don't find that funny. So I think that's why, English is my home for reading. But I did read a lot of scripts and lots of books in different languages. So, when I studied Spanish, I would read a lot of Gabriel Garcia Lorca, who's a famous playwright, just beautiful, like really beautiful text. Then also in Chinese, I would read, I learned classical Chinese as well. So you've got traditional Chinese, which is traditional Chinese script, which is where in Hong Kong, they still use traditional script. We've got simplified script, which is in mainland China, which was created so that everyone could read. And then you've got classical script, which is ancient Chinese.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, I just found it fascinating. So basically, I would read like old texts like Confucius and stuff in ancient Chinese. And it was so beautiful because it is so poetic. And each character is a picture in itself. So it's like a picture story. It is absolutely beautiful when you look at the text in itself. So I remember doing a dissertation on Mulan, which obviously everyone knows as the Disney cartoon, but I was reading the ancient texts and it was just fascinating to read about this warrior hero who existed in China in dynasties ago. And my granddad was a author, so he wrote everything in Bengali, and he wrote his biographies in Bengali as well. So we kind of had to be able to read that as well. So there is something really quite special when you can read something in the original language, for sure.
Where do you want to go next in terms of learning? What's on your bucket list of languages you still want to learn?
Oh, there's too many. I've noticed as I've gotten older, it's gotten harder to learn.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, I can feel my brain synapses starting to shut down from learning languages. But I think, it's one of those things, it's all about daily practice. And you really have to be very motivated and dedicated to actually doing that, because it's not one of those things where you take a class once a week and that's it. You just can't learn anything that way. So yeah, if I was to learn another language, it would take like daily practice, and it would make me actually have to force myself to actually have to do it. So that's the tricky part, I think.
To pivot to books, your bio says you read a book a day. I'm very intentional on this podcast not to ask people about their reading numbers, because
don't.
I just think that's not what reading's about. We're not in a contest here.
100%.
But I do love hearing people, because I don't read I read a lot, but I don't read anything close to that. So I would love to hear, how do you do this?
Oh, it's all about finding different mediums. We're really lucky. We're living in an age where we get audiobooks and things like that. So what I do is I have a mixture of the two. So I can have an audiobook playing in the background whilst I'm doing something else, which is what I do a lot. I put these at like 2 speeds, like ×2, and because of the kind of language skills and all the kind of work that I do, which has created this level of analytical brain, very quick brain, it's allowed me to like listen to things really quickly. So I can hear all of it at that speed. Which makes things a lot easier, because something that's say 10 hours long, I can listen to it in like 5. So easily I can already read a book that way. But what I do is then I pair that with a kind of a physical book. So I'll read like one type of book, and then I'll have a physical book, which I always prefer anyways, to just kind of sit there and absorb that, and I'll read that over 2 days. So basically what I do is I have an audiobook over 2 days and a physical book over 2 days. And that way you're reading a book a day.
And so you're obviously also a fast reader when you read with your eyeballs.
Yes. And that was, again, a technique I learned from work, which is having to absorb lots of information very quickly, which is my brain can read in the middle of the page, and it just kind of creates the words around it. So it understands it within the context. So you just read in the middle of the page of each page. And so it speeds up. It's like speed reading.
I've never heard of this.
Yeah, it's a really strange technique, but it's like the brain is able to, it's like it builds everything based on context. Like, so it will put words in knowing that would be the logical word that would be next to it. So it can just kind of figure out what it's trying to say. And I can get the context out of it by just reading through the middle of the page.
Is this a skill that you learned somehow, or is this just normally how your brain absorbs things?
No, it was a skill I learned like after like many years of the type of work I was doing, which is more analytical. I was able to kind of read things very quickly because I was having to absorb huge amounts of data very quickly, which meant my brain started working on a much faster level. It's really strange. This happens to everyone who starts doing that kind of work. So the brain synapses slightly change in a way, they get rewired. So you are able to absorb like lots of information very, very quickly.
What kinds of genres do you normally like to read?
Yeah, see, it's a mix. So basically, because obviously I do run a sort of books related podcast that kind of focuses more on non-fiction books, so biographies and essays and things like that. So, that requires a less sort of need to kind of absorb huge amounts of like sort of the details and things like that. But my sort of guilty pleasures, as you could say, are like crime, horror, thrillers, and then also different kinds of weird, very dark comedy. So yeah, but when I'm reading like literary fiction, that's for pleasure. So I will sit there and I'll just absorb it, and I will just go more slow with it because otherwise, as you said, if you cannot speed read through a crime novel, because you will basically not pick up those small hints and details of who the killer could be or whatever, and you'll basically miss a massive chunk. So certain kinds of books you really should read properly, but there are other books where you can just, if it's like I read a lot of sort of those kind of self-help type books, you can just get a lot of information without needing to read all the small details. So yeah.
Are there any genres that you won't read, that you are just absolutely not your thing?
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I am not a romance reader. I'm a cynic at heart, and also certain kinds of comedy. Like, I only really like dark comedy, which says a lot about me. God, geez, I've got really, you should just look at my Netflix. It's just like really true crime documentaries and just a horror, and and that basically sums up also my reading habits as well. Sometimes I struggle with magical realism as well, as a logical person. In that sense, like I struggle with like fantasy side of stuff. There are certain kinds of fantasy I grew up reading. Of course, I read Tolkien and all the Harry Potter and things like that, but which I really enjoyed, especially as a child, just having that. But as an adult, I really struggle with some of the fantasy elements. Yeah.
This episode is sponsored by Lover's Moon by Mark Leslie and Julie Strauss. Hello, Julie Strauss, host of Best Book Ever and contemporary romance author.
Hello, Mark Leslie, frequent guest of the show and horror author.
Julie, what do you know about werewolves?
Absolutely nothing, Mark. I'm scared of everything. What do you know about romance novels?
Well, my mom read a ton of romance when I was a kid, and Fabio was always on the cover, so Fabio must be in every romance novel, right?
That's exactly right, yes. Mark, do you know what we should do?
I do, yeah.
Let's say it at the same time, okay?
Okay. 1, 2, 3. Never speak again.
Write a book together.
Yes, what you said. We should write a book together.
I was thinking we could each write about our favorite things.
Yeah, bloody fangs.
And making out.
Occult shops.
Having sex in a bubble bath.
Ancient feuds.
A marriage proposal in Central Park.
A book made of human skin.
And friendly honeybees.
We've really got something here.
I don't see how it could fail.
Lover's Moon by Mark Leslie and Julie Strauss is now available everywhere you buy books.
Wait, Mark, what was that thing you said earlier?
Don't worry about it.
Do you remember how you first came across The Stranger?
It was on my dad's bookshelf for ages. He had it there and he kept telling me about it and saying like, oh, this is something you need to read. And you have to understand, like, when I grew up, like, my father had a very different attitude of dealing with kids. He never really saw us as kids. So he was talking about quantum theories and, the physics, and he really liked sort of very dark and sort of philosophical, existential books. So that was the kind of books he was giving us to read. And so, I was very young when I read The Outsider. So it was really interesting. So I was maybe in like 11 or 12 years old. But there was something that really resonated with me because I was just like, I think I was just going through some kind of weird existential phase myself. Like, that is your early teen years, things are changing. And I think I was really sort of questioning like my place in the world at that point. So I was reading lots of even like Sartre, Kafka.
At 11?
See, I'm not kidding. Like,
Wow.
That's the kind of books we were given. So I was really fascinated by it. And I was just like, this is really strange, like this, how this person is treated for how they behave. It opened up my mind to like how people's attitudes are towards each other. It's really strange, and how you see yourself in the world.
Real quick, let me ask you, is it called The Outsider in England?
It's got two names. So I think it just depends on the translation, but there is one called The Stranger and one called The Outsider.
Okay.
But obviously it comes from the original French. But, it's a very old book from, I think it was from 1942. It's a novella. And I think that's what's also so profound about it. It's so small. It's a very short book.
Can you tell my listeners what it's about? First, those who weren't forced to read it in high school.
Oh, you were forced to read it. Jeez,
Yeah,
we
it
were
was
not forced to read that.
AP English Lit in high school. We had.
Oh my God, I'm jealous. Jeez, I would have preferred that for sure. Like,
actually, I was so lucky. I had this. Those when you have those English teachers who change everything.
Yes, 100%. It's a strange book. It's like obviously goes through lots of themes of like philosophy and also absurdism with existentialism. And it kind of follows the character of Meso. I probably butchered that name right there, who is like a very indifferent French settler in Algeria. And he doesn't seem to participate like within traditional culture or Mediterranean culture over there. And I think very quickly he has like, I think he finds out that his mother has died, and he's basically goes to this funeral where the other mourners perceive him to be extremely cold and indifferent. And weeks later, he then kills a man, and he's subsequently tried and sentenced to death. But it's all about that trial where basically the jury, the courts, they focus more on his lack of grief for his mother's death than the killing itself. And so that was what the focus is. So it's a quite profound book, I think, especially for 11-year-old. Yes.
I can't. What did you think when you were 11?
I'd grown up reading. I don't know if you remember this as a kid, but like The Necklace of Raindrops, or these are like your typical childhood books growing up. And then I just kind of made this transition really quickly from The Necklace of Raindrops to the murder. Yeah, I was like, great. So
this feels like the logical next step.
Clearly, so I was just like, is this what adult books are like? So yeah, but it was something really strange about it, because I was just like, I was questioning it as well, which was, I was sitting there like reading that trial, and I was going, but why? Why are they looking at him instead of not the murder itself? Like, what has that got to do with anything? There is something kind of flawed about this kind of system where they see your behavior in one way, and so the murder of a man in another way. When I was reading about him, he seemed so alone. It was almost like a tragic character. I didn't realize about this theme of existentialism, and then I just kept reading of all these different kinds of books on the theme, and each time it just got more and more like more profound, because I was just like, that's where it all started. Like, that was the first book that just kind of started creating the snowball effect of, I want to read more, and I want to read Kafka, and I want to read more of those kind of books. And it was really quite deep, and it just kind of changed my way of thinking of books in general, actually, because I was like, they were always seen as like, oh, literary fiction, that was quite pleasant, these books are really nice, it kind of puts you in a nice mood and things like that. But this was different. It was making me think.
So is it a book that you reread frequently since you were 11?
Never again. Never again. I have a very strict book policy where if I loved a book so much and it was so profound, I never read it again.
What?
Yeah.
Really?
Yes, completely. Just because I really worry that it will change my viewpoint of that book, which had such a profound effect on me at that time. I worry that it would suddenly, when I reread it, I'll be like, what was I thinking? And so, yes, I just don't want that feeling to go away, which is why I don't revisit a lot of countries where I've had the best experiences. Same thing. I just like having that memory of that sort of time or place in that kind of frozen, in that kind of moment like that.
Oh my gosh. So even for this conversation, you didn't reread it.
No, I
So
just
you have
remembered
this
it.
strong a memory of a book you read so young.
Mm-hmm.
Are you like that with all the books you read where you have this kind of recall, or only the ones that are really...
Oh, no. Only those ones. Only ones that basically
okay.
have like had a real sort of effect on me. I will remember really well. So definitely like Handmaid's Tale, and actually another one was the Wide Sargasso Sea.
Mm-hmm.
Which I actually preferred shockingly over Jane Eyre. I know a lot of people are like, oh, that's controversial, but there was something about it that was just, again, so profound. And it's always like this kind of alone, this character that's always alone. And there's all these themes of like loneliness within these characters. So I think those are the ones that I really kind of remember very, very deeply. And I guess it was just at a time, and I think we talked about it, which is when you're an introvert, it just really sort of resonates with you, these kind of characters.
Now that's interesting, because I had such an interesting experience rereading it, because I remember in high school, we were a very tight group in our AP Lit class. And, everyone took this as, you know how teenagers are. And we just thought Meursault was badass because he just didn't care about society. But I rereading it now at this time of world history was just a completely different experience. And I was very surprised at how bleak. And I didn't look at him as I did when I was a teenager, when I thought he doesn't care about society. I thought he is so beat down because that's what this society does. The society beats us down, and he has been beaten down to the point of numbness.
Apathy. Yes.
So I just think it's interesting that you are... I love that you're not going back to it, because it definitely changed for me. Definitely. It's just so interesting that Meursault reflects, for me, who I am at the time.
Yeah, you're completely right. And I feel that with almost every book, and it doesn't matter what kind of genre or book or what whatever. When you read it at a time of your life, that specific time of your life, it just changes every single time. It's so amazing. And sometimes I think books just fall into your lap for a reason at the right time.
Yeah, because for me, the note I have here is it is so much darker and more misogynistic than I remembered.
Yeah. And so, and you think that's why you think these writers are incredible, to have foreseen a world like this, or just to have really understood what the world was, or society was really like.
Do you think Meursault thought he was better than everyone?
It's weird, because I think with Meursault, I think he just didn't care. Like he was more apathetic. It's not that he thought he was better than anyone. He was just like, I'm aside from everyone.
Yes.
He's like, I'm just not like anyone. I'm not in society anymore. I don't belong anywhere.
Which is almost scarier.
It's scary, right? It's like someone who's got nothing to lose. And, exactly. And those people are the most dangerous people you can find. They can just do anything. And the thing is, it's not that he saw him above the law. He didn't see himself as anything. He was just like, I don't exist as a human being. It's sad, isn't it? It's like, I think more and more people are starting to feel that way as well. Just like, I don't matter. I'm a momentary blip in this universe. Anything, there's no consequences to my actions. And Meursault is very much like that, where it's like, there's no consequences to my actions, because it doesn't matter. And I think that's worrying, isn't it? Because that's exactly what's happening.
Well, and it again brings me back to sympathy for Meursault, because as I was, you can almost understand that as a protective reflex, even though he never says, I was abused, so therefore I'm cold right now. There's never any justification at all. But in a way, you can see that disconnect as appealing. It would be lovely to not feel anything for anybody. It would be lonely and all those things, but it would also be nice to not wake up and cry when you read the newspaper.
Yeah.
So definitely. In a way, he's almost appealing because numbness sounds glorious right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. That's what's so interesting about the novel, because it doesn't give you a background. And, I think that's really interesting because it leaves you kind of guessing, and it leaves you kind of like thinking, does he need a background, or does he need to have that? And I know a lot of the time novels will use that as padding. They'll go through the sort of the backdrop of something happening. But in this case, it makes it so immediate. So it's interesting, isn't it? Because you're just left with this person in your hand just as it's going, like real time. So in a way, is he advanced for his time, that he's living mindfully because nothing matters really?
Or is he, in today's parlance, is he a complete sociopath?
Is it a spectrum?
Is it a spectrum? That's a great question.
This is it. Where's the line?
Okay, so at this point in the podcast, I always ask people what they're reading right now. I guess the question for you is, what are you reading today? Because the answer will be different probably tomorrow.
That is true. So I'm currently reading, I've got the book here anyways. It's a brand new book called Haramasi.
Okay.
Which is
a pretty cover.
It is a very pretty cover. So I got that from the publisher, and it's basically a play on words for the word haram, which means obviously in sort of a lot of Islamic culture, which is like forbidden or prohibited, and pharmacy, so haramasi.
Okay.
And it's really interesting because it goes through the diaspora of voices from the South Asia, Middle East, and North African diaspora. So these are like essays essentially. It's a collection of just like going through different kind of ideology, like ideas such as like visibility, invisibility, love, strength, and race, and just like it paints a picture of what it's like to live as a fractured person, both in the UK and also back at home. So yeah, it's a brand new book. The book's coming, I think it's just come out, and I'm hoping to speak to this author soon. So I'm looking forward to it. Yeah.
And what are you listening to?
That's a good question. So I just finished Simon Ong's Energize. So Simon Ong is like a very famous coach, and he wrote a book called Energize, which is all about understanding your energy levels in the world of like just trying to cope with life and work and things. Because for the both of us who have to deal with differing energy levels all the time, it's really important to kind of understand that, trying to put power back into the energy that we have and trying to make the most of what we have. And, even in situations where you're like working in really, really difficult jobs and stuff like that, it's like understand what energy you have left to try and maximize it as much as possible.
Will you tell my listeners about your podcast?
So it's called the How to Be podcast because it all stemmed from the fact that I was petrified of public speaking and realized that I needed some way of kind of dealing with just various issues like confidence and like resilience and perseverance. And then I realized it's a much bigger thing. I was like, this isn't just for me. This is for lots of other people who have to deal with the same things and learning to be an introvert and things like that, and navigating this, like the world when it's one way and you're trying to sort of manage that. And then I realized that there was just so much we can do and learn from the books that we're reading. So what I do is I look at like 2 to 3 books a week. Now every other week, but and I interviewed the authors. So we get like a much more widened sort of knowledge for the subjects. And so, we covered everything from like how to be sad So I spoke to Helen Russell, who wrote the book How to Be Sad, and she actually wrote the book The Year of Living Danishly, which is a very famous book then.
And title. I love
it.
It
is
so
such
much.
A cute town. She actually lives in Denmark because it's supposed to be the happiest place in the world.
This is what they tell us.
This is what they tell us. So, and then I also spoke to Purna Bell, who is a power lifter, and she wrote the book Stronger. She's also she's an award-winning journalist. She became a power lifter after her husband actually took his own life. It was quite sad. He was a secret addict, and she found power in powerlifting. And she wrote an entire book about women's physical strength. It was so inspiring. I was just like, this just like makes me feel so warm and giddy inside, honestly, because I was just like, we never hear about it. We never hear about women's physical strength. And it is just like incredible. So I did a whole like episode on like women's physical strength. And I heard from lots of women's voices who were saying, yeah, this is what we do. And this is how we kind of hold ourselves. And it was so fantastic, and that's kind of the idea, which is you picking a subject, every other week and really kind of looking at lots of different voices through books, kind of understanding how we can really understand this topic like holistically.
What a fascinating job you have.
I was just like, why not? I just really enjoy these subjects. And I'm sure you do too, with all the reading that you do.
This has been so interesting talking to you. I hope you will come back anytime you have a book you want me to read and want to talk to me about. This has been really fun.
Me too. I love that. This was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Will you take a minute and tell my listeners where they can find you and your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So my website's on www.howtobe247.com and at howtobe247 on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, and everywhere. But the How to Be, of course, all the places. And the How to Be podcast itself is on all major platforms. And there is also a YouTube channel. So everywhere.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for being with me today. It's really been fun getting to know you.
You too, Julie. I really appreciate it. It's been great.
Ever since I spoke with Suswati, I've been binging her podcast, and I'm sure you can tell by this brief chat with her that she's a really thoughtful, interesting host. I know you're going to love it. As for the books, I would love to hear what you think about reading and rereading the classics, and if they change for you as you grow older. Tell me all about it over on Instagram at Best Book Ever Podcast. Remember, you can find links to all the books we discussed in the show notes or at my website, bestbookeverpodcast.com. And if you have a book you want to tell me about, click on the Be a Guest button on my website or Instagram bio so we can chat. If you enjoyed this episode, do me a solid and leave me a review on whatever podcatcher you use. It's an easy and free way for you to help other people find my work, and I am so, so grateful. Thank you for joining me today, and I will see you at the library.